A figure, distorted, moving in an almost hypnotic way. A face, or rather a mask, that looks like something out of a nightmare. It wears a Max Headroom mask. You know, the quirky 80s computer-generated character? The one that was on all those new Coke commercials? But this isn't funny. This isn't the Max Headroom you see on TV. This is wrong. This is deeply, profoundly wrong. The figure is swaying, rocking. Its movements are erratic, almost seizure-inducing. Behind it, there's a rotating corrugated metal panel trying to mimic that signature Max Headroom geometric background effect, but done in the most unsettling way possible. And the only sound? A loud, static-filled buzz. Like the TV is broken, like reality itself has been interrupted. The sportscaster, Dan Roan, comes back on air, visibly shaken, and he says the now iconic line that perfectly captures what just happened. Well, if you're wondering what's happened, so am I. That was the first intrusion. But it wouldn't be the last. 2 hours later, at approximately 11:20 p.m., it happened again. This time on a different channel. This time with audio. And this time, the message was something entirely different. This is the story of the Max Headroom incident, the most sophisticated TV signal hijacking in American history. A mystery that has never been solved. Who was behind this? How did they do it? And what did it all mean? And this is the story you've never heard. Andrew here. For Permanent Underclass, where we explore the weird stuff your therapist would tell you to avoid. The "oh cool, now I'll never sleep again" side of reality. If you're easily scared, easily offended, or easily anything, you're in the wrong place. Tonight we're diving deep into one of the most bizarre mysteries in broadcast history. Not because it's famous, though it has become something of a cult legend in certain circles, but because it represents something truly terrifying. The idea that the images coming into your home, the signals that you trust, the programming that you assume is safe, can be taken over, can be hijacked, can be replaced with something from your nightmares. This isn't just a story about a prank. This is a story about the fragility of our media, the vulnerability of our infrastructure, and the strange disturbed mind, or minds, who managed to interrupt the television signals of America's third largest city, broadcasting their nightmare to thousands of unsuspecting viewers. We're going to take this apart piece by piece. We're going to look at every theory, every lead, every possibility, and by the end of this 3-hour journey, you're going to know more about the Max Headroom incident than almost anyone on the planet. Let's begin. Part 1. The night everything changed. November 22nd, 1987. To understand what happened, we need to understand where it happened. We need to understand Chicago in 1987. Chicago in the late 1980s was a city in transition. The downtown skyline was changing. The John Hancock Center had been completed 2 decades earlier, and the Sears Tower, now called the Willis Tower, dominated the lakefront, its antenna piercing the sky at 1,450 feet. These buildings weren't just architectural marvels, they were communications hubs. Their broadcast towers sent television signals across the entire metropolitan area, reaching millions of viewers in Chicago and beyond. The stations involved were WGN-TV and WTTW. WGN-TV was an independent station, known for its extensive sports coverage. They were the home of the Chicago Bulls and Chicago Cubs, and their newscast, the 9 o'clock news, was a staple of Chicago television. WTTW was the local PBS affiliate, part of the Public Broadcasting Service network, and they carried Doctor Who as part of their late-night programming. On the night of November 22nd, 1987, both stations were going about their normal business. At WGN-TV, sports anchor Dan Roan was wrapping up his segment on the Chicago Bears' victory over the Detroit Lions. The game had been a good one. The Bears were in their championship-winning season, the year of the famous Super Bowl Shuffle. Chicago was football crazy. At approximately 9:14 p.m., it happened. The first intrusion lasted about 30 seconds, though different sources give slightly different numbers. Some say 17 seconds, some say nearly a minute. What we know is that viewers' screens went black for about 15 seconds, and then the Max Headroom figure appeared. Now let me describe what this looked like, because the image itself has become iconic in certain circles. The person, we'll call them Max, for simplicity, was wearing a Max Headroom mask. This was the famous character from the mid-1980s, created by George Clooney's brother Max for a series of commercials promoting New Coke. The character was known for his glitchy, computer-generated epiphke, rants, his spiky hair, his distended features. But this wasn't the clean-produced Max Headroom of the commercials. This was a homemade version, a mask, poorly constructed, ill-fitting. The person wearing it was rocking back and forth, swaying in a way that was clearly intentional but also deeply unnerving. Behind them was a semi-rotating, corrugated metal panel. The hijackers had tried to replicate Max Headroom's signature geometric background effect, but it came across as genuinely disturbing, like watching something glitch in real life. The only sound was a loud, buzzing static. There was no speech in this first intrusion, just that image, that movement, that terrible audio. And then, after about half a minute, it was over. WGN's engineers managed to regain control by changing the frequency of the studio to transmitter link, essentially forcing the hijacker's signal to lose its hold. Dan Roan came back on air, and you can hear it in his voice. He's shaken. He's trying to play it off, trying to be professional, but you can tell something has rattled him. Well, if you're wondering what's happened, so am I. He jokes that the computer running the news took off and went wild. And then, incredibly, he continues with his sports report. The Bears highlights, as if nothing happened. But something did happen. Something that would haunt the airwaves of Chicago for decades. Part 2. The second intrusion, 2 hours later. If the first intrusion was unsettling, the second was something else entirely. 2 hours later, at approximately 11:20 p.m., WTTW was broadcasting the first part of a Doctor Who serial called Horror of Fang Rock. This was classic Doctor Who, a base under siege story set in an old lighthouse in the late 1800s, featuring the Fourth Doctor and his companion Leela. It's a good episode, atmospheric and tense. But at 11:20, viewers got something else entirely. This time there was no one on duty at the broadcast tower. The Sears Tower, where WTTW's transmitter was located, had no engineers present at that hour. This would prove crucial. Without anyone to manually counteract the takeover, the intrusion was allowed to continue far longer than the first. Where the first intrusion had lasted under a minute, this one went on for approximately 90 seconds. And this time, there was audio. Distorted, garbled, but audible audio. The Max Headroom figure began to speak, and what he said was bizarre, fragmented. A stream of consciousness that seemed to jump randomly between topics. He mentioned nerds. He called WGN sportscaster Chuck Swirsky a frickin' liberal. He held up a can of Pepsi while referencing the Catch the Wave slogan from Coca-Cola's new Coke campaign, the very campaign that had created the original Max Headroom character. There was more. So much more. The figure held up his middle finger to the camera, inside what appeared to be a hollowed-out sex toy. He hummed the theme song to Clutch Cargo, a 1959 animated series. He said, "I still see the X," a reference to the last episode of that show, which some fans misheard as "I stole CBS." He complained about having piles, hemorrhoids, and claimed he had made a giant masterpiece for all the greatest world newspaper nerds. This was a reference to WGN's call letters, which stand for World's Greatest Newspaper. He put a knitted glove on his hand, commented that it was dirty, and said his brother had the other one. And then came the final sequence. There was a crude jump cut. The main figure moved mostly off screen to the left side of the frame, and from the side his partially exposed buttocks were visible. On the right edge of the frame, a woman appeared, wearing what looks like a French maid costume, and possibly a mask. She was holding a fly swatter, and then the voice cried out, "Oh no, they're coming to get me. Ah, make it stop." The woman began spanking Max with the fly swatter. The figure was crying, screaming. The image faded briefly into static. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The Doctor Who broadcast resumed. Viewers were left staring at their screens, trying to process what they had just witnessed. WTTW received dozens of phone calls. People wanted to know what had happened. What was that? What did they just see? No one had an answer. Part 3. The technical how. How did they do this? Let's pause for a moment and talk about the technical achievement, because make no mistake, what these people did was genuinely impressive, in a terrifying way. The broadcast intrusion was achieved by exploiting something called the capture effect in radio transmission. Here's how it works. The hijackers sent a more powerful microwave transmission to the station's broadcast towers than the stations were sending themselves. When two signals compete for the same frequency, the stronger one captures the receiver. The station's equipment essentially locked onto the hijacker 100K signal instead of their own. This required two things: expertise and power. First, the expertise. You need to know exactly which frequency the stations are using for their studio-to-transmitter link. You need to understand microwave transmission. You need to be able to time your signal precisely to override the legitimate broadcast. In 1987, this wasn't common knowledge. This was specialized stuff. Second, the power. The hijackers needed a transmitter powerful enough to override professional broadcast equipment. This wasn't someone with a walkie-talkie. This was serious hardware. Experts who have analyzed the incident over the years have concluded that the signal likely originated from somewhere in the line of sight of both stations' broadcast towers. Both WGN and WTTW had their towers atop tall buildings in downtown Chicago. The John Hancock Center and the Sears Tower, respectively. To hit both, the hijacker would have needed to be in a location with a clear view of both towers. Some have speculated about possible locations: the Aon Center, the Chicago Board of Trade building. Any number of high-rise buildings in the loop would have had line of sight, but no one knows for certain. Here's what's truly remarkable. This was 1987. No internet as we know it, no smartphones, no digital video. Everything was analog, and yet someone managed to hijack two television signals simultaneously in one of America's largest cities. The FBI investigated. The FCC investigated. No one was ever charged. No one ever came forward. And here's the thing. After 2009, when American television switched from analog to digital signals, this kind of hack became almost impossible to replicate. The digital transition changed everything. The capture effect that allowed the hijack simply doesn't work the same way with digital signals. In a strange sense, the Max Headroom incident was a last gasp, a final moment when something like this could happen in American television. And it happened exactly once. Part 4. The theories. Who was behind this? Now we get to the really interesting part. Who did this? Why? And how have investigators, journalists, and internet sleuths tried to solve this mystery over the past 4 decades? Let's go through the main theories. Theory 1. The inside job. The most commonly discussed theory is that this was an inside job, someone with knowledge of the station's technical infrastructure, possibly a current or former employee. The reasoning goes like this. You need to know the exact frequencies to hijack the signal. You need to understand the technical setup of the studio to transmitter links. You need access to the buildings where the transmitters are located, or at least a location with line of sight. Who would have this knowledge? Engineers, technicians, former employees who were laid off or fired and had a grudge. After the incident, there were rumors that the FBI had questioned several people in the broadcast industry, but no charges were ever filed. And despite decades of speculation, no one has ever been publicly identified as a suspect. Some have pointed to the fact that the intrusions happened on a Sunday night, when staffing would be minimal. Both stations had reduced crews on weekends. The second intrusion, on WTTW, happened at 11:20 p.m., when literally no one was at the tower to manually override the signal. This feels planned. This feels like someone who knew the schedules, the technical setups, the vulnerabilities. But if it was an inside job, why the Max Headroom mask? Why the bizarre, nonsensical monologue? Why the crude final sequence with the spanking? A disgruntled employee might want to make a statement. But this statement is so strange, so disjointed, that it doesn't fit any obvious motive. Theory 2. The hacker community. Chicago in the late 1980s had an emerging hacker community. This was the era of early computer bulletin board systems, of phone freaks, of people who were fascinated by the edges of technology. Some have speculated that the hijackers were part of this scene. Perhaps a group of hackers who wanted to prove something, to show that the system could be breached. This theory has a certain appeal. The Max Headroom character itself was associated with the emerging digital culture of the 1980s. Computer-generated, glitchy, artificial. Using Max Headroom as the face of the hijack could be seen as a statement. We can reach you through your TV. We can control what you see. We are the new digital frontier. But again, why the specific content? Why the strange monologue, the crude finale? Hackers making a point might broadcast something political, something meaningful. This was just weird. Theory 3. The performance art. Here's a more creative theory. What if this was performance art? A deliberate theatrical statement about media, about control, about the absurdity of television? In the late 1980s, performance art was having a moan 150K. NT artists were pushing boundaries, challenging norms, making statements through unusual public interventions. The Max Headroom character was already a parody of corporate media, of advertising, of the artificial nature of television. What if someone used that same character to make a bigger statement about the vulnerability of our media systems? The disjointed monologue, references to New Coke, to Doctor Who, to Chuck Swirsky, to nerds, could be seen as a stream of consciousness critique of television culture. The final sequence with the spanking could be a statement about the absurdity of it all. This theory is appealing because it explains the strangeness. It wasn't meant to make sense. It was meant to disrupt, to confuse, to make people question what they were seeing. But if it was performance art, why has no one taken credit? Performance artists typically want recognition. They want their work to be known. 4 decades later, and no one has come forward. Theory 4. The prank gone wrong. Maybe this was just a prank. A group of friends who thought it would be hilarious to mess with Chicago TV. They didn't expect it to go this far. They didn't expect the attention. The problem with this theory is the sophistication required. This wasn't someone with a TV antenna and a dream. This was technically complex. You don't accidentally pull off a broadcast signal hijack. Theory 5. The government, because there's always a government theory. Some have speculated that this was a test, perhaps by the government, perhaps by some intelligence agency, of broadcast vulnerability. In the 1980s, there were genuine concerns about broadcast security. The Soviet Union was a threat. Terrorist attacks were a fear. Perhaps someone was testing how easy it would be to interrupt American television. But this theory doesn't explain the specific content. Government tests would be more professional, more controlled. They wouldn't include a man showing his buttocks and getting spanked with a fly swatter. Theory 6. The Internet Sleuths. Now let's talk about what has happened since. Reddit. In recent years, Internet investigators have taken a serious look at the Max Headroom case. Some have claimed to have identified people involved. There have been doxing attempts, surveillance video analysis, financial record searches. But here's the thing. None of these investigations have produced definitive results. They've produced theories, suspects, possibilities, but no one has been conclusively proven to be behind it. Some of these internet sleuths have claimed to have found the original tape, the source recording. Others have claimed to have traced purchases of the Max Headroom mask, the costume, the props. But every time a new lead emerges, it seems to go nowhere, or the information is incomplete, or the trail goes cold. The Max Headroom incident remains unsolved. Part 5. The cultural impact. Why does this matter? In the immediate aftermath of the intrusions, there was some media coverage. Chicago newspapers wrote about it. The local news couldn't stop talking about it. For a few days, it was a minor sensation, but then it faded. Other news took over. The story became a footnote, a curiosity, and remember that time conversation topic for Chicago natives. Until the internet found it. In the years since, the Max Headroom incident has become something of a legendary creepypasta. It's been featured on countless YouTube channels devoted to mysteries, to creepy stories, to the unexplained. It's been written about in digital magazines like Motherboard, which called it an influential cyberpunk hacking trope. Why does this matter? Why do people still care? I think it's because the Max Headroom incident represents something deeper than just a strange TV hijack. It represents our fear of media manipulation, our concern about what we see and hear in our own homes, our anxiety about technology and control. In 1987, the idea of someone hijacking your TV signal was science fiction. It was the plot of a movie, not something that happened in real life. And yet it did happen. And no one could stop it. And no one ever found out who did it. That's terrifying, not because of what was broadcast. The Max Headroom figure is more ridiculous than frightening in retrospect, but because of what it represents. The vulnerability, the powerlessness, the realization that the images in your home aren't as secure as you thought. Part 6. The characters. Who was Max? Let's talk about the figure in the mask. Who was Max? We don't know. That's the mystery within the mystery. What do we know? The person was male. The voice was male. The body structure appeared male. The person was wearing a Max Headroom mask, which was readily available in 1987. There were Halloween costumes. There were novelty masks. The mask was paired with sunglasses. Again, common and available. In the second intrusion, there's a female figure as well. The one in the French maid costume. The one doing the spanking. Who was she? Was this a solo act with a partner? Were there multiple people involved? There's been speculation about height, about weight, about build, but nothing definitive. The video is low quality, the lighting was poor, and the movement was erratic. It would be nearly impossible to identify someone from this footage. Some internet investigators have claimed to have identified individuals based on this footage, but these claims are disputed, and no mainstream investigation has confirmed them. Part 7. The legal aftermath. What happened to the perpetrators? After the intrusions, the FCC launched an investigation. They were joined by the FBI, though the FBI's involvement was primarily in an advisory capacity. This was an FCC matter, not a criminal matter in the traditional sense. An FCC official was quoted as saying that the perpetrators faced a maximum fine of $100,000 and up to a year in prison. This was a serious matter. This was illegal. This was piracy. Broadcast piracy, an interference with licensed communications. But there was a problem. The statute of limitations. In the United States, federal crimes have a statute of limitations, a time limit after which charges cannot be filed. For most federal offenses, it's 5 years. The intrusions happened in November 1987. By November 1992, the window had closed. Even if the FCC had identified the perpetrators, they couldn't have prosecuted them. This has been a factor in the case. Some have suggested that potential suspects have remained silent specifically because they know they can't be charged. The 5-year window came and went, and now they're home free. Part 8. Similar cases. This wasn't unique. The Max Headroom incident wasn't the only time someone hijacked a TV signal. There are other cases in broadcast history. The most famous is probably the Captain Midnight incident of 1986, a year before Max Headroom. In that case, someone interrupted the HBO signal for several minutes, transmitting a message criticizing the cable network's subscription model. Captain Midnight, the persona adopted by the hacker, was identified and prosecuted. He was a satellite dish dealer who had a grudge against HBO. There's also the Southern Television broadcast interruption in 1978 when a fake nuclear attack warning was broadcast in the UK. That one caused genuine panic. But the Max Headroom incident is unique in its strangeness. The Captain Midnight message was comprehensible. A complaint about fees. The Southern Television warning was terrifying but clear. It warned of nuclear attack. The Max Headroom message was nonsensical, bizarre, seemingly meaningless. That's what makes this case so fascinating. There's no obvious motive, there's no clear message. It's just strange. Part 9. The Legacy. What has changed? In the aftermath of the Max Headroom incident, broadcast security was reviewed. The FCC implemented new procedures. Stations became more vigilant about their technical infrastructure. But here's the thing. Most of those changes became irrelevant in 2009, when the United States completed the transition from analog to digital television. Digital broadcasting is fundamentally different from analog. The capture effect that allowed the Max Headroom hijack doesn't work the same way. The vulnerabilities that existed in 1987 have been closed by technology. In a sense, the Max Headroom incident was a relic, a one-time event that could only happen in the specific technological environment of late 1980s analog television. But that doesn't make it any less fascinating. It doesn't make the mystery any less compelling. Because we still don't know who did it. We still don't know why. And we never will, probably.